And so I want to get right into our next presenter, an amazing woman. I got to spend a little bit of time with her briefly. I just met her actually. But her soul, her energy is just amazing. Her name is Sarah Grace. And she's a powerful, dynamic individual who spent over a decade merging her career as a paramedic in the California 911 system with her gift as a clairmedium and clairaudient and medical intuitive and energy healer, all of the above. She's got it all. She combines Western and energy medicine. Sarah spent years studying both physical and energy anatomy while applying her skills in critical settings to thousands, get that, thousands of patients as they dealt with life and death emergencies. She now has a vibrant practice working with clients both individually and in groups throughout the USA as they embrace their own power, make sense of their energetic abilities, and heal past traumas. She's also the author of a book called Journey into Grace, which is also, this is also her talk, Journeys into Grace, Tales of a Psychic Paramedic. I'm kind of excited to find out what she's going to share with us. So please put your hands together and welcome Sarah Grace.
Hello. Thank you, and thank you everyone for showing up here today. It's an honor to be here speaking with you. And just to kind of begin, can I have a show of hands for anybody who perceives subtle energies or has intuitive abilities? I pretty much figured most everybody in here. My people! My people! Well, welcome, and thank you again for having me. At the age of 7, I'm from a very small town in South Dakota, and at the age of 7, I woke up one morning and I was able to see, hear, and feel energy outside of the normal 5 senses. There was no trauma or anything. Sometimes you hear of other teachers and healers having a trauma. There was no specific trauma. I just woke up and I was able to initially see the aura construct. And then we went into hearing and feeling very deeply and just kind of knowing different things. And this is pre-internet, South Dakota, town of 2,000, very conservative. And so, I'm a kid and I'm like, well, everybody's like this. This is just how it is. And I was very quickly shown, no, this is not something that we talk about. And in fact, I was told by my family that if I dialogued about it, I would be sent away to a mental institution. And so I was very heavily shamed and condemned for it. So I lodged that and I stored it away as a deep shame and tremendous fear. And so I began to overcompensate by overachieving and just doing a lot of things to kind of ground myself and make myself feel as normal, quote unquote, as possible. And the intuitive abilities never went away. Essentially, my capacity, I don't know if I should say this, but I'm going to. It's essentially like, go for it, she says. It's like akin to being on like low-dose acid or something where it's just very subtle with the auras and the tracers, and you're connected to one. You're connected to all things, all plant things and trees and things like that. But I'm not on any substances, and I don't take those kinds of things. And so that's kind of when people are like, well, what is it like to look out of your eyes and to be like that? That's kind of one of the ways that I like to just break it down so that people can have a general sense of understanding, because as I've come into my abilities, and I'll tell you a little bit about that journey, what I've become aware of is really, you guys, there's millions of us. There's millions and millions of us that are very intuitively gifted and just are still very fearful of it, because still at this point in time, and it's changing, fortunately, but society still has a little bit of a negative stigma associated with this type of thing. And so what I understand now is that I'm to be a bridge or a mouthpiece between the energetic community and the mainstream, if you will. So backing up a little bit, growing up in South Dakota, went through that whole thing. I lost my mom. It was a very traumatic childhood, a lot of violence and things, and I was dealing with that in addition to the high sense perception and awareness. I was a competitive athlete, and I ran hundreds and hundreds of miles just to stay grounded and try to be in my body, just to like make it manageable for the stimulus. And after my mother died when I was 17, my whole life imploded, and I just kind of lost it. So I went off the rails with drugs and alcohol, and I went kind of on a predisposed path of, it was really just trying to take myself out because I was just over it. It was too much. You know, I didn't have the nuclear family support anymore. I didn't know how to be in my body. I didn't understand why I could see spirit. I didn't understand why I could perceive all of this extrasensory input, and I just didn't want to deal with it anymore. So I did a lot of different things. I moved to Florida. I moved down to LA. I was trying all of these different, business opportunities and career opportunities, but intuitively, my guides and my intuitive team was like, you're going to become a paramedic. And I was like, oh no, like, that's a big deal. I could kill people if I don't know what I'm doing. This is, and what I didn't understand at the time was that, you start at the very basic level and then you work your way up. And so after kind of face planting in life enough times, like with doing all kinds of different drifts and trials and things, I eventually just gave in to my intuition and said, fine, you win. And so I went to the UCLA EMT program, and I got my EMT certification, and then I tend to be a person who goes for it, and so I was like, all right, if I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this. So I jumped in, I started in Compton, Inglewood, 911. And that's where I was for the first 2 years of my career. And I learned fast. I learned fast. And it was incredible. For the first year and a half or so, I was just fixated on trying to figure out the physiological anatomy of what I was dealing with a lot of trauma, gunshot wounds daily, stabbings daily, and that kind of thing. And so I was very focused on the Western medical side. I was aware of the energy while I was on scenes, still didn't want to deal with it, still didn't want to, work with it. And so I still shoved it down. I moved to the Bay Area with a man who became my husband and the father of my 2 children. And then eventually we came up to the Sacramento area. As I continued to step into my power, into my abilities, just as a paramedic, just kind of like getting my feet wet and not being green anymore, the energies were kind of increasing in duration, increasing in what I would see on scenes. So, for example, we would walk in and there would be something like very traumatic. Perhaps somebody, like a family member, dropped out of cardiac arrest and everybody's freaking out and family members are running around and screaming. Something like that would be, a standard 911 call. Well, I would walk into the room and this energy would come over the top of me. It seemed to come from behind kind of my shoulder blade area. And it would come over the top of me and it would be almost like a blanket, like a calming energy. And I wasn't trying to do this. I was there to do my job, but it was such a palpable feeling that even the cops and the medics and the firefighters would look around like, what was that? What's going on? But what would happen is the entire energy of the scene then would begin to calm down so that then we could delegate and then we could begin to actually work with the bodies and work with the families and work with everything else. And so over time, I kind of became the paramedic who was always there the last 10, 15 minutes of life. Dead bodies are relatively easy because the soul's already transitioned and then we just need to deal with the logistical aspects. But when somebody's physically dying in your presence and they're terrified and they're looking at you and their family is screaming, it's an entirely different thing altogether. And so to me, at first I was kind of tripped out and people were like, dang, you're like a black cloud. Like, what are you, Grim Reaper? And I was like, I don't know, I'm just trying to do my job here. But I was like, I had so much death and so many really high velocity calls. And it was in part, I was kind of used to the chaos and the extreme violence due to my childhood. And I just began to kind of get this intuitive sense of knowing what to do. I knew what was gonna happen before it did. I knew what the person needed to hear. And then I was able, with my clairvoyant abilities, I'd begin to watch the chakra systems release and the soul going out the crown of the head. And then the loved ones come in, the family that's already crossed comes in, and and then we're sitting there doing CPR, and I know that they're gone, but then we do what we need to do here. And so after over a decade of that, I was still pretty closeted about my abilities. My coworkers knew something was up. They're like, what is with this chick? They could feel that something was going on with me, but I was still scared to say anything because I'd finally found like a socially accepted job, right? Something that was like, something my family could be proud of and that I was very egoically identified with. It's a very powerful and esteemed thing to be a paramedic, right? And I was so frightened that I would jeopardize that by coming out and be like, oh, I see spirits, It was just something I was really still very scared of. Well, I had one call in particular, so this has now gone over the course of roughly a decade. And I was getting more and more comfortable, but still very gun-shy about being out about it. I had one near Sid's baby, who it's kind of one of the scariest things or most intense things we can see as paramedics, especially those of us who have children. Well, it was in Rockland actually, and I had a firefighter come out and like hot potato me this kid who was 6 weeks old, near Sid's, and it was just, I had this moment where I held this little baby in my hands, and it was literally this big, and everything just stopped for me. And we're trained, like you get into that spot and you just go into automated whatever. But I just had this moment where I was just like, I was staring at it like vapor locked. And it was then that in my intuition, or this energy that I work with, essentially came through me and started delegating and like totally knocked me out of the way. And it was this really beautiful exchange. We got the child to the hospital and ultimately it survived, which is a blessing. But that call in particular, I was like, okay, you win. I don't know what this is, but clearly it's not going away. So how about I become educated? And in that understanding, I knew that I personally had to face a lot of my own shadow material, a lot of the stuff that I had gone through that I didn't want to face, that I wanted to keep repressed and buried. But I knew intuitively that if I'm really going to step into this in my fullest capacity, I had to face me. And I was like, oh, man. So I went home, I went back to South Dakota, I faced my family, I went through all of that is detailed in the book specifically. But what I also looked at was kind of my judgment of the psychic community as a whole. And I was just like, I didn't feel akin to, I didn't feel connected to. I felt I had a lot of judgment about being ungrounded and woo-woo and just out there. And I totally own that. And so I essentially said to myself and to spirit, I was like, okay, I'll do this, and it's gonna be my way. I wanna become educated. I want it to be applicable so that we can have practical application in the tangible reality, so that we can take extraordinarily high-level energetic concepts and psychic awarenesses and bring them down here so that we can implement them into our every single day, right? Because to me, it's like if we can talk about crystalline indigo, all this stuff, and that's cool, and like how does that help you get milk at the grocery store, right? Like, or pay your PG&E bill, right? Those are the kinds of things. So I started with what's my predominant ability is the clairvoyance, the ability to see the grid infrastructure of other people. I can see the auras, I can see the different layers, the mental, physical, emotional, spiritual components of the physical vessel and the auric construct. I can hear the thoughts and kind of go into the past traumas and patternings. There's all kinds of this stuff that was available. So I started with the clairvoyance, and I began by getting attuned to Reiki, because it's like that's one of the simplest, easiest ways to do it, right? It's like go to 7-Eleven anymore and you can find a Reiki master pretty much, right? It's that way for a lot of spiritual stuff anymore, but that's okay. Different talk, different time. So I started with Reiki, and that kind of turned my hands on, and then I started playing with energy. And I also got trained in mediumship, a lot of different branches of shamanic practice and lineage, and then medical intuitive abilities. And so the most important thing that I did, in addition to being willing to really face my own shame, Because when I say toxic shame, you guys, I took it like all the way there, you know, with feeling like there was something grossly wrong with me for being like this, and then everything that I did in the way of self-mutilization. Yeah, sure, that. Just because when you don't like yourself, exactly what she was just talking about, like, you know, we take it out on ourselves, and we do have this toxic inner landscape. We can have that. But the willingness to find compassion for ourselves, and the willingness to go inside and say, okay, yeah, I messed up, I made some mistakes, and, you know, how can I integrate this? How can I forgive myself? How can I be like, I'm human, right? And in addition, becoming empowered with, okay, why do I see this? Why do I hear this? Why do I feel this? Why do I know this? And how can I make it work for me in this life so that I don't feel like I'm being bombarded constantly, right? So my intuition essentially told me I did a year-long, ended up being about a year and a half, but a year-long self-imposed internship program. And so I studied each of those different modalities, and then my most fertile learning ground, if you will, was I did roughly 50 free hands-on healing sessions, because I was like, I'm not charging, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, you know? And so I would have just friends or family come be a guinea pig for me, and intuitively, I would just be guided to do different things or move energy or currents. And what I found right away was that I didn't fix or adhere to any one particular genre, because when I stayed open to all of them, anything that particular individual needed could come through. And so we have all of these different things, modalities like shamanic lineage and mediumship available to us, and the person that, you know, every individual needs something different. And so I was very clumsy. I was totally nervous. It was hysterical because by this time I was like a veteran medic, like, you know, dialed. I had all that time in like the really urban areas, and so I was very strong in that. I could run just these gnarly calls without even skipping a beat, but I'd like have my little hands-on healing session. My hands would be all sweaty, and I'd be like, oh, I hope I do a good job, you know, it's like, ah. But I felt like I was finally coming into my own ability. I was finally stepping into this, and I was facing something, part of myself, that I had repressed for 25 years. So to kind of catch you guys up to where I am now, I listened to what I was supposed to do, if you will, and I stepped into and I jumped off. I'm still a paramedic. I'm a paramedic instructor, and I'll maintain my license, but Spirit intuitively led me to opening my own private healing practice, and my clientele is national already. I was just on Hay House Radio a month ago, and so my book is sold internationally in Australia, Canada, and the UK, and it's just this beautiful stepping off. And again, what I'd really like to just emphasize to you guys, it's about listening. It's about the willingness to kind of go into our internal space and just be willing to be like, the shadow aspect and embracing those parts, and the curiosity of like, what is this? What is this gift? Well, every one of us is gifted. All of us, you guys are all gifted, right? And so how do you want to use it in your life? How do you want to show up with it in your life? And so that's really what I do, is I help a lot of people in different capacities, but really I'm just like a giant cheerleader for this kind of thing now, because it's pretty cool. Like when we listen to what we're supposed to do, Spirit just opens the floodgates, and then you just start flowing, you know? And that's possible for all of us. And so that's my talk. Thanks.
Did you bring your books?
It's in the back. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear if you guys want to have kind of a Q&A. Pretty much everybody in here is energetically sensitive to some capacity. If any of you guys had any questions, or this is the book, Journey into Grace, Tales of a Psychic Paramedic. And it's available on Amazon, both in Kindle and paperback, and you're welcome to grab a copy here as well. Yes.
Before you talk, I've got both mics on. Let me get the mic to you so that it gets recorded, okay?
I was so excited at that point when you said you got into you were a veteran paramedic, and you had your hands, you were healing, starting to do those healing work. Can you say a little more about one of your experiences when you started as a veteran paramedic in the ambulance, like in healing? What would happen? Like what?
In the 911 setting specifically,
Yeah.
or when in my private practice?
No, in your 911 setting.
In the
When
911
you started
setup.
integrating that part.
Oh, well, yes, that's a fantastic question. Essentially, it was always present. I just tried to pretend that it wasn't there in terms of the energies on scene, the colors and the intuitive. Intuitively, I knew whether or not the person was going to live or die. Intuitively, I often knew what we were responding to before we were ever dispatched. And like we'd be able to walk in as a medic, you're able to walk in and you can tell critical, not critical, if the person's, you know, how far they are from death, like what's my time frame, that kind of stuff. Most every medic can do that. What a lot of people couldn't do was see the grandfather that's already been deceased standing next to that person, or, you know, different aspects like that. So once I got really into it and opened to my abilities, I could see the chakra system more specifically, and I could see like the energetic, the emotional construct of the person, essentially the toxic areas within them, and a lot more, just more high definition.
So who's going to play you in the TV version?
Oh, you know, I already know. What's her name? Ashton Kutcher's baby mama, Mila.
Oh, Mila Kunis.
Kunis or something?
Yeah,
Isn't she
Mila
a little
Kunis.
something?
So that was just the first part.
Yes.
Okay. The second part is where are you teaching the EMT and the paramedic, and how can you bring this into it?
Great question. I teach at NCTI in Roseville. I've been over there forever, like 12 years. At this point, I pretty much just proctor the National Registry curriculum, which is the highest level test for the nation to give the person the last go-ahead. There's so many of us, like just standard people, but even firefighters, nurses, cops, medics that are coming to me now in my private practice. And it's been so beautiful for me because it's a merging of the two worlds. You gotta understand, you guys, this is like the most alpha testosterone world imaginable. These guys are like, shocker, what, right? They was not open at all. And now they've kind of just known me for so long, and they've been witnessing what's happening. So they're starting to kind of come over, which is really, really beautiful and open, because a lot of those guys are the ones that need it, like the energy clearing and the rebalancing more than anybody. So it's just it's exquisite how it's starting. And one of my things is, again, yeah, we're all gifted, and there's so many of us in the first responders that are right there, the hospice workers, the nurses that are doing the same thing that I did, right? It's just that nobody's really stood up and been like, okay. So that's what I'm doing. Yeah, you're welcome.
I'll go here, and then I'll go here.
So I have a friend that has those abilities too, and we've been talking about this universal energy of really being tired. Can you sort of explain what's going on with this energy that's sort of prevalent in the universe right now with...
The universe being tired?
Yes. Everyone sort of have the same symptoms of not... It's just a universal energy right now.
It's kind of like the heaviness, the lethargy, fatigue.
Yeah.
I likened it, who said the ISIS comment? You were talking about
RJG.
ISIS integration. And it really, that resonated with me in the way of shadow. Most everybody in here understands duality and light-dark paradigm and balancing, integration, all that kind of stuff. And so really it's a heavy, because the structure of the basis of most of society, or much of society, I should say, right now is still kind of scared of facing their own inner shadow, right? Everything's out here. Yeah. And so essentially that's going to fatigue the vessel, which is then if the individual is fatigued collectively, a bunch of individuals make up the collective, right? So everybody's feeling a lot of that. The more we can each go into those aspects that are kind of less than desirable with ourselves. And I pretty much like pointed out how I did it. You know, there's a million ways to do it. But as we're willing to do that and to go into and face and integrate those aspects of us, ultimately the entirety of that paradigm vibration will shift or can shift.
So I know I don't have next questions.
Could you just hold for a second? One second, let him talk, and then I'll give the mic to you. Otherwise, we won't hear you.
Thanks, JG. Sorry.
Okay.
I think this is kind of on the same note, but I'm particularly moved, having read the book. I would appreciate if you would share the story about your case with the autistic boy
Oh.
and your experience there and how you saw things about your abilities and what world he lived in. And since autism is such a huge part of our current
Absolutely.
social
and
growth, I'd love to hear
Absolutely.
you share from that point.
And thank you for bringing that up. I have a lot of different clients with a lot of different interests or things that they're seeking. And several years ago, I was a mother brought her severely autistic son to me. And initially, I didn't know what, if anything, I was going to be able to do for him because he was completely mute. And before the point, now he does the talking letter board now. But when I touched him, I was able to go into his world because that's what happens with me. It's like I can see your aura, but then when I touch you, I can go all the way into your grid infrastructure and I can follow your thoughts and your belief structures and the self-limiting views, and I can get into the traumas and I can go, it's like a little journey in there. And then we can realign and do all kinds of different stuff. But I went into his world and I was able to see. So essentially, you don't have to scratch the acid reference, but what we could say is instead, at Best Buy or at Target, you go into the back and there's the whole wall of television screens, and you know how they're all saying the same thing? Well, very often for people like us, it's like we're standing in front of a wall of television screens that are all blaring different things, okay? And we got to focus on the one that's right in the middle because that's Earth realm. That's this tangible reality, and all this other stuff is coming at us. Well, this boy, so I'm usually operating, or there's how many screens are available to me on any given day is anywhere from like 10 to 25 is pretty much what I'm working with on a constant basis. I touched this boy, hundreds, if not thousands, of screens available, and he was just blown away. I could see him. He was like, "You can see me." I was like, "Yeah, man, like, what's up? Show me where you're at. Show me what this is." And he was so excited because he'd been in his bubble. And he's extremely gifted, as many, many of them are. Genius level IQ. And he was just working with such a high vibration. And there's a reason for it. They're coming in for a collective reason to hold and offset different pitch vibrations. There's a whole thing that's happening with it. But essentially, they're just energetically extraordinarily gifted beings and very, very open. So once he was given that little spelling board, he started being able to kind of put verbiage to what it was he was working with. And so in that initial consult with his mom, it was so beautiful because I was able to relay what he's experiencing on the inside when he's like hitting his head on the ground or doing, the screaming fits or whatever it was. And so it was a bridging and emerging. So I find myself doing that with autistic families more and more, and it's an honor, it's a gift. Yeah, for sure.
So it's a good thing that you did go before me because that whole issue, this is the duality that I'm feeling and seeing in my work and wherever I go, and we're all getting this, is the younger people who are coming in now, even the millennials, towards the very end of this, is they're connecting dots so quickly that it's very frenetic. And the thing is, some of us did that when we were kids and we didn't know what to do with it because no one knew what to do with it. Now we're more conscious and we're more aware of what children are doing, what they're trying to say, what they're grappling with, what they're frustrated with, and you just elucidated what it is that you do. So here's the darker side, is what you were talking about, what she had said, and why I wanted to just jump in, is that there's a lot of acting out that's going on around this presidential campaign right now. And and regardless of who we're for, I mean, this is not a political statement. It's just that we're getting a lot of people who would normally not say something or say it just with their friends, really acting out of shadow of the fear, of the frustration, of the where's mine, this is going to happen, and that's very, very interesting, and this is going to be playing out for several more months.
Did you have a question? Or
No,
was
I'm
it-
just making a comment. I mean, you can take it from there if you want. It's just we're seeing the bright side of it, which is not so obvious because we don't usually pay attention to autistic children or really bright kids, and we're seeing the dark side of it. And I think this duality is, to me, it's very disconcerting to be able to stay centered in all of that when there's just so much stuff going on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this earth realm is certainly a paradox, right? There's ecstasy and despair simultaneously. And what I've personally learned with all of it, and I'm ever evolving, I'm always a student, just like all of you, right? Doing the best that we can. We all have good days and bad days. And for me personally, the more empowered, the more abilities that I've been given with what my gifts are, is a direct result of my own willingness to go in and face my own crap. Nothing to do with out here. Nothing. Yeah.
So, hi. I was, well, I'm reading a lot of material about ascension, that we are kind of moving into a more etheric level on this planet. And I wondered if you had experiences of that. Because it seems like there are a lot more people who have abilities like yours around now than probably
we're
were
coming out.
when I first, right.
Absolutely, and we're shifting from more of the masculine to the feminine collective vibration as well. And something that I've noticed personally, initially when I was getting into the healing genre, I kind of jumped on the bandwagon of we're ascending and it's going to be a utopic and this is the first time and whatever. And realistically, the more educated and energetic information I was given privy to, it's really this has happened, countless times. This has gone back, light, dark, masculine, feminine, in several 7,000, 10,000 year flip-flops. And really the thing that's separating, or is kind of unique to us as humans right now, is the electronic gadgetry that we're bringing with it. That's kind of what's new this time. Yes, we are certainly rising up. We're going into a higher vibrational realm, and we're bringing in a lot of more feminine currents, right? And we're going to start to see the shifting of all of the masculine infrastructure and all that over the next little while. Continuing, it already is, but great question. Yeah.
Anyone else? Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Sarah.
guys.